the streets of Oak Ridge were still quiet as the first light of morning stretched across front porches and familiar sidewalks. Vanessa Carter, a 55-year-old black woman with a silver streak running through her tightly pulled-back ponytail, kept her steady jogging pace. Dressed in a navy cap, zip-up windbreaker, and well-worn sneakers, she looked every bit the neighbor everyone waved to. Most folks around town knew her as the kind lady who volunteered at the library and never forgot a birthday. Few knew her deeper story, how years of grit and perseverance had shaped her into someone with quiet strength and surprising influence. As she turned the corner near Miller Park, the familiar comfort of her daily run brought her peace. This routine had grounded her long before her life changed, before she married Richard Carter, before the media labeled her the wife of a billionaire. Despite their wealth, Vanessa had never lost touch with the community or the values she cherished. She still drove her 2006 sedan, still bought fresh fruit from the Saturday farmers market, and still greeted the mailman by name. For Vanessa, success never meant leaving her roots behind. Slowing down at the community bulletin board near the park entrance, something unexpected caught her eye, a bright yellow notice fluttering in the breeze. Curious, she stepped closer. As her eyes scanned the bold type, her expression shifted from relaxed to stunned. The Oak Ridge Community Bank, the only locally owned bank in town, was scheduled to close in just 30 days. According to the announcement, it was being acquired by National Financial Group, a faceless corporation known for cutting costs and gutting small-town services. Her heart sank. She immediately thought of Mrs. Henderson, the 87-year-old widow who still walked to the bank every Friday to deposit her pension check. Or Sam Torres, whose modest taco shop had opened thanks to a starter loan from that very bank. This wasn't just a building made of brick and marble, it was a lifeline, woven into the fabric of the community. Its closure wasn't just business, it was personal. Without missing a beat, Vanessa pulled out her phone and called her husband. "Richard, it's me," she said, her voice calm but purposeful. "Did you see the notice about Oak Ridge Bank? They're shutting it down. I know you're tied up in meetings, but I need to look into this right now." After a short pause, she nodded. "No, I don't need you to come. I'll handle the first conversation." She hung up, took a deep breath, and turned toward the bank. Sweat still fresh on her brow and her heart pumping for more than just exercise, Vanessa wasn't going to let her community lose something so vital without a fight. And she didn't need to change clothes to be taken seriously, because when something mattered this much, showing up as you were was more than enough. Vanessa Carter didn't stop to change her clothes or second-guess herself. She jogged directly toward Oak Ridge Community Bank, her sneakers tapping purposefully against the sidewalk. Her pulse quickened, not from exertion, but from urgency. She knew that once corporations like National Financial Group moved in, it was rarely reversible. Community values were always the first casualties. She arrived just before the bank opened. Through the gleaming glass doors, she could see staff in suits shuffling papers and adjusting computer monitors. Everything looked normal, too normal for a place facing imminent shutdown. Vanessa paused to collect herself. She was here not just as a resident or even as a concerned citizen. She was here as someone who knew how vital this bank was to Oak Ridge's way of life, and someone willing to fight for it. The manager, Patricia Blake, opened the doors at precisely 9 a.m. Her eyes scanned Vanessa's attire, a simple tracksuit and baseball cap, and her face settled into a polite but unmistakably judgmental expression. Vanessa recognized the look instantly. She had seen it before, years ago, when she'd been a struggling bookseller applying for her first business loan. Back then, she didn't have connections or capital. She only had hope. And they hadn't even given her a second look. But that was then. Now, she walked into the marble-floored lobby with quiet confidence. Conversations paused. Keyboards stopped clicking. Several employees glanced up from their desks, some smirking at the sight of a woman in workout gear. Vanessa ignored the whispers. She approached the front desk where a young receptionist greeted her with a forced smile. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone sweet but doubtful. "Yes," Vanessa replied firmly. "I'd like to speak with the manager regarding the closure notice. I believe there's an alternative that deserves consideration." The receptionist blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is urgent," Vanessa replied. "May I ask what this is concerning?" Vanessa paused just a beat before replying. "A potential offer to keep this bank from closing." The young woman's eyes widened slightly before she picked up the phone and whispered into the receiver. A few moments later, she gestured to a row of leather chairs. "Please have a seat. Ms. Blake will be with you shortly." As Vanessa sat down, she could feel the weight of scrutiny settle on her shoulders. Snide murmurs floated through the air. "She probably wants to complain about ATM fees. Looks like she got lost on the way to the gym." Still, Vanessa stayed composed. She fixed her gaze on a wall lined with photos of Oak Ridge through the decades, parades, ribbon cuttings, and block parties, all with the bank in the background. This place had stood for generations. If no one else was going to fight for it, she would. No matter how she was dressed, Vanessa Carter had come with purpose. And she wasn't leaving until someone listened. 15 minutes passed before Patricia Blake, the bank manager, finally emerged. She was tall, sharp-featured, and dressed in a sleek gray suit that looked like it came straight from a high-end department store in Manhattan. Her smile was practiced, her heels clicked with purpose, and her handshake was quick, too quick. "I understand you had a concern about the bank closure," Patricia said with mild curiosity, already turning toward her office without waiting for a response. Vanessa Carter followed, her pace unhurried. She knew this dance. Once inside, Patricia gestured vaguely toward a chair but didn't wait to see if Vanessa took it. The large office, filled with framed certificates and a polished mahogany desk, felt more like a showroom than a place for serious conversation. "I'm here," Vanessa began calmly, "to discuss the possibility of purchasing this bank. I believe its value to the community is too great to be absorbed by a national conglomerate." Patricia stopped mid-sentence and blinked. "Purchase," she repeated, her eyebrows lifting high. "Yes," Vanessa confirmed. "I'm prepared to make an offer." Patricia chuckled, then quickly masked it behind another corporate smile. Her eyes flicked over Vanessa's athletic attire. "Ma'am," she said with unmistakable condescension, "banks are not grocery stores. You can't just walk in and buy one." Vanessa met her gaze without flinching. "Especially not someone like me, right?" The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia cleared her throat. "What I meant was, acquisitions of this size are handled through corporate channels. And frankly, National Financial Group has already initiated the process. Their offer is on the table." Vanessa nodded. "But not finalized. Which means there's still room for alternatives, especially ones that serve the public interest." By now, curious staff had started hovering near the office door, pretending to sort papers or make copies. Patricia's voice took on a firmer edge. "Perhaps you'd prefer to speak with an advisor about a CD or small investment portfolio. That might be more appropriate." Vanessa straightened in her chair. "That won't be necessary. I'm offering to purchase the entire Oak Ridge branch. I have the means, and more importantly, I have the will." A soft scoff came from outside the glass wall. Patricia leaned forward, her voice now sugar-coated with skepticism. Ms. Carter, banking acquisitions involve millions of dollars, federal regulations, legal teams. This isn't a bake sale. Vanessa responded evenly, I'm aware. My offer is $15 million. This time, Patricia didn't hide her laughter. She even turned slightly to roll her eyes at a colleague standing nearby. And how would you fund this? Through a GoFundMe campaign? Vanessa didn't take the bait. My husband and I have the necessary capital. Oh? Patricia sneered. And what does your husband do? Sell insurance out of your garage? The room behind them rippled with quiet laughter. Vanessa stayed composed. She'd been underestimated before. But this time, they were going to learn, respect isn't earned through wardrobe choices or skin color. It's earned through action. And she was just getting started. Vanessa Carter sat up straighter in the sleek leather chair, unaffected by the whispers and eye rolls beyond the office's glass walls. She wasn't here to entertain them, she was here to protect her town. The quiet scoffing and dismissive looks were nothing new to her. She had built her life and her business, despite people like Patricia Blake who judged books by their covers. Patricia leaned back in her chair with an air of casual disbelief. Ms. Carter, we're talking about a $12 million acquisition. It's already in motion. National Financial Group has the experience, the lawyers, the infrastructure. I understand all of that, Vanessa replied calmly. That's why I'm offering $15 million, a bid that's not only competitive but community-driven. I'm not here to dismantle this place. I'm here to preserve it. Patricia's eyebrow twitched. And where, exactly, are these funds coming from? Vanessa folded her hands in her lap. From my husband and me. That drew more attention from outside the office. Some employees leaned closer to the glass, clearly amused by what they assumed was a fantasy. Patricia didn't even try to hide her smirk this time. Your husband, she repeated with a skeptical tilt of her head. What, does he drive an armored truck or sell penny stocks? Vanessa gave a patient smile. He's in finance. Of course, Patricia said, sarcasm dripping from every word. So is everyone who has a 401k and a calculator. Vanessa didn't flinch. He's also a published financial strategist and the CEO of a global investment firm. Patricia scoffed again, but her confidence had begun to flicker. You see, Vanessa continued, her voice unwavering, we didn't build our lives by impressing people with flash. We built them by making smart choices, by showing up, and by standing our ground, even when people didn't think we belonged. The room fell silent. Even the giggles and hushed voices outside faded. Patricia stood, clearly irritated. Ms. Carter, I've been more than polite, but this is a waste of our time. You have no documentation, no appointment, and you're dressed like you just left a spin class. This isn't how business is done. Vanessa stood, too. Respectfully, business should be about substance, not appearances. Patricia marched to the door. Security will escort you out now. Just then, Vanessa's voice cut through the tension in the air. Before I leave, I'd like the contact information for your corporate acquisition team. I assume they're familiar with how real deals get done, even if your staff isn't. There was a long pause as Patricia blinked, surprised by Vanessa's poise. You want to talk to the top? Patricia muttered, attempting to regain control. Fine. But they'll laugh you out of the room just like I should have done 15 minutes ago. Vanessa gave a nod, her calm never breaking. Let them laugh. I'm used to that. What matters is what happens after. And with that, she stepped out of the office, not as a woman in workout clothes, but as a woman on a mission. As Vanessa Carter exited Patricia Blake's office, she found herself facing a full audience. Nearly every employee in the bank had abandoned pretense. They no longer hid behind computer screens or file folders. They openly stared, whispering behind half-covered mouths. To them, Vanessa was a curiosity, an overdressed jogger who somehow believed she could buy a multimillion-dollar bank. The quiet disdain was palpable. One man in a pinstriped suit leaned against a counter and muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe she thinks she's in a Hallmark movie." That drew a few chuckles. Patricia, now standing beside Vanessa, crossed her arms. "I think we've indulged this long enough," she said loudly, signaling to the security guard near the exit. "Officer Tom, please escort Ms. Carter out." She was just leaving. Tom hesitated. His eyes darted between Vanessa and Patricia. He wasn't comfortable. He could feel something wasn't quite right about the way this woman was being treated. But policy was policy, and a nod from upper management carried weight. Vanessa didn't move. Instead, she looked straight at Patricia, then turned to the assembled bank staff. Her voice, though soft, carried across the marble lobby. "Before I go, may I ask one final question?" The lobby fell still. "To whom at National Financial Group should I direct my purchase offer?" she asked. Patricia rolled her eyes with dramatic flair. "As I mentioned, you can contact their Chief Acquisitions Officer. Not that it will matter." Just then, the front doors of the bank swung open with a soft hiss. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence impossible to ignore. His polished shoes tapped sharply on the marble floor with each measured step. Heads turned. Conversations halted. Even the smirking employees straightened up, suddenly alert. Vanessa didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Am I interrupting?" Richard Carter asked, his deep voice calm yet commanding. Patricia's posture stiffened. Her face shifted from smug control to stunned confusion. Mr. Carter," she stammered. Several employees gasped audibly. The man now standing in their lobby was no ordinary husband. He was Richard Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Global Capital, recently listed by Forbes as the 28th wealthiest man in America. His financial empire spanned 3 continents, and his reputation in the banking world was legendary. Richard's eyes found Vanessa immediately, his expression warm but composed. "I got out of my meetings early," he said, walking toward her. "Thought I'd join you." Vanessa gave him a nod, calm as ever. But around them, jaws were dropping. Patricia blinked, her earlier confidence vanishing. You're her husband?" "Yes," Richard replied, now turning his attention to her, "and I understand you've been speaking with my wife about a potential acquisition." The room, moments earlier filled with smug laughter, was now gripped by silence. Officer Tom stepped back without a word. No one was escorting Vanessa Carter out now. As the last echo of Richard Carter's Italian leather shoes faded across the marble floor, the atmosphere in the lobby changed entirely. The same employees who had chuckled moments before now stood frozen, some with mouths slightly open, others suddenly finding great interest in the ceiling tiles or the floor beneath their polished loafers. Patricia Blake blinked rapidly, as if hoping she was mistaken. "Mr. Carter. I had no idea. If we'd known that Ms. Carter was..." Richard didn't let her finish. "Would it have changed the way you treated her?" he asked, his voice even, but with an unmistakable edge. The kind of tone that didn't need to rise in volume to command attention. The silence stretched. Patricia's customer service smile returned, but it was now visibly strained. "Of course, Mr. Carter. We meant no disrespect to your wife. There must have been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there was no misunderstanding," Vanessa replied, her voice calm yet pointed. "You were perfectly clear." The employees who had been leaning in to watch the spectacle now leaned back, as if trying to disappear into the wood paneling. Even James Thornton, the regional director who had just arrived moments before, seemed unsure of where to stand or what to say. "I believe my wife mentioned an offer of $15 million? Richard asked, pulling a business card from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and handing it to James. "You can have your legal team contact ours this afternoon." James took the card like it was made of solid gold. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Absolutely. We'll be in touch right away. But let's revise the offer," Richard continued, glancing briefly around the room. "Make it $14 million. Patricia looked up sharply, confused. "You're lowering the offer?" Richard gave a slight smile. "Yes. Consider it a $1 million discount in honor of the warm welcome my wife received here this morning." The words landed like a thunderclap. Patricia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Several staff members suddenly found their shoes incredibly fascinating. No one dared make eye contact with either of the Carters. "And Ms. Blake," Richard added, turning toward her, "I assume your bank has a training manual. I'd suggest reviewing the section on customer service, particularly the part about judging people based on appearance." Patricia nodded mutely, her cheeks turning a deep shade of crimson. Vanessa gently placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Before we leave, Richard, I'd like to say something." He paused, then gave a knowing nod. Vanessa stepped forward once more, no longer just the woman in workout clothes. She was now standing in full authority, earned not through wealth, but through grace under fire. "My presence here wasn't about proving anything to you," she began, addressing the room. "It was about fighting for this community. But the way I was treated? That's a reflection of something much deeper, and it's something worth fixing." The room remained silent. No one argued. No one laughed. For the first time all morning, they listened. The air in the lobby was thick with silence, one not born from reverence, but from reflection. For the first time all morning, no one was whispering or smirking. Instead, the employees stood still, their earlier arrogance replaced by awkward glances and shuffling feet. Vanessa Carter, still dressed in her navy running gear and worn sneakers, stood at the center of it all, not with anger, but with purpose. She had no need to raise her voice. The room was already listening. "I came here today not to throw around money or names," she began, her tone steady. "I came because this bank matters. To this town. To the people who live here. And especially to the ones who don't have the luxury of driving 30 miles to the next branch when this place shuts down." She let the words settle. Her eyes moved gently across the faces in front of her, not with judgment, but with quiet challenge. "Mrs. Henderson, 87 years old, walks here every Friday to deposit her Social Security check. Rain, snow, heat, it doesn't matter. This bank is part of her routine, her dignity, her independence. What happens to her when you close these doors?" No one answered. Sam Torres, the young man who opened his taco shop 2 blocks away, he couldn't get a loan from the big banks. But this branch saw potential. They believed in him. That's what community banks are supposed to do, see people, not just portfolios. Her voice grew more resolute. "But instead of hearing me out, I was judged by my clothes, my skin, my perceived value. Told I didn't belong here. Laughed at. Mocked. Dismissed." Patricia Blake looked down, her expression unreadable. Several employees shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa paused, then softened slightly. That's why so many institutions fail, not because of money, but because they forget the people they're meant to serve. In the back, a voice called out hesitantly, "Mrs. Carter?" A woman in her early 50s stepped forward. Her name tag read Nancy Hayes, and her eyes were kind, if a little nervous. "I've worked here for 22 years, she said quietly. "Not all of us are like that. Some of us do care. Deeply." Vanessa offered her a sincere smile. "I believe you, Miss Hayes. And that's exactly why this place deserves to be saved." She turned to Richard and gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "I think we're done here." As they walked toward the exit, the crowd instinctively parted. No one dared speak, not because of fear, but because they understood that something far greater than money had just taken place. At the door, Richard paused. He didn't look back when he said, "When the acquisition is finalized, we'll be reviewing staff. I suggest everyone here use this time to consider how they represent the values of this bank." And with that, the Carters stepped outside into the morning light, leaving behind not just a stunned lobby, but a message no one there would soon forget. The heavy glass doors of Oak Ridge Community Bank closed behind Vanessa and Richard Carter with a soft click, leaving behind an eerie stillness inside. The staff, once buzzing with judgment and laughter, now stood motionless, some red-faced, others deep in thought. What had begun as an ordinary morning had turned into a wake-up call. Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, casting a golden glow across the small-town street. Vanessa slowed her steps, taking in the fresh air, the scent of spring blossoms, and the distant sound of a lawnmower humming somewhere down the block. She exhaled deeply. It wasn't the morning run she had planned, but in many ways, it had been far more meaningful. Richard glanced sideways at her, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That wasn't exactly how I pictured my Friday wrapping up," he said. Vanessa chuckled softly. "No, but you know me, I can't watch something wrong unfold and just walk away." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "And that's one of the reasons I fell in love with you." They walked a few steps in silence, passing by the familiar bakery and bookstore she used to visit before anyone knew her last name. Her life had changed in many ways over the years, but at her core, she had never strayed from the values that shaped her. "I didn't stand up in there because of who I'm married to," Vanessa said, her voice thoughtful. "I stood up because I've been that woman, the one sitting across from a manager who thinks you don't matter. I've been dismissed. I've been underestimated. And now," Richard added, "you're making sure no one else in this town has to feel that way." She nodded slowly. "If we're going to own something as important as a community bank, it needs to be more than a transaction. It needs to stand for something. Respect. Fairness. Belonging." As they reached the car, Vanessa turned back briefly to look at the bank one last time. It was just a building of brick, marble, and glass, but it represented so much more. Inside that building were people, some who needed to grow, and some who, like Nancy Hayes, quietly carried the soul of the institution forward. Vanessa knew they'd have a role to play when the transition happened. And she was determined to give them the chance to help reshape it. Before getting in the car, she looked at Richard and smiled. "Let's make sure this place becomes exactly what this town deserves." He nodded. "We will." And with that, they drove away, not as a billionaire and his wife, but as neighbors who believed in something bigger than money. They believed in community. And they had just taken the first step toward preserving it, one quiet, determined voice at a time. At its heart, the story of Vanessa Carter is about dignity, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth. It reminds us that appearances are often deceiving, and that true value is not worn on the outside, but lived through consistent actions, integrity, and compassion. For older adults, especially those who have weathered life's storms, this story holds powerful resonance. Many have experienced being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed simply because of how they looked, where they came from, or how they chose to live. Vanessa's story is a testament to the power of standing firm, even in the face of ridicule, and choosing to respond with grace rather than anger. Her actions also remind us that it's never too late to make an impact. At 55, Vanessa didn't retreat into comfort or convenience. She showed up for her community, fought for what was right, and left behind a legacy rooted in service, not status. Her calm courage shows that real influence doesn't come from shouting the loudest but from living by your principles. This is a call to all of us, especially those in later chapters of life. Never let society define your value. Your voice still matters. Your experience still holds weight. And when you act with integrity, whether for yourself, your family, or your neighborhood, you plant seeds of change. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who speak softly, act wisely, and refuse to compromise their values. Vanessa Carter didn't just save a bank, she reminded everyone watching that respect, once earned, can change everything.